what's
Mhm.
everyone? Scott out here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. Excited to be back with another client interview for you guys today. And I'm excited to have Joseph on with us today. Joseph is one of our students that we've been working with for about the last 3 months or so. So it hasn't been that long, but he just recently wrapped up his summer internship recruiting process very successfully, and wanted to get him to come on here and talk to you guys about just his entire recruiting journey, and also, just share some insights that will hopefully help you on your own journey as well, and just give you some inspiration. Um, Joseph, first of all, thank you for taking time to be here with us today. And if you could help us out by just, introducing yourself a little bit, telling our audience kind of who you are, what's your background, and then we'll dive into some follow-up questions for you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Joseph. I'm a sophomore studying accounting and financial engineering, minor in math, and I study at WashU in St. Louis, so semi-target school.
Cool. Um, and you obviously, like I said, just finished recruiting for summer 2026. Can you, to start off, what was the offer that you ended up getting?
Yeah, so I accepted an offer in New York at Capital One's debt capital markets team. Super excited. That was my sort of like main goal to work at debt capital markets. So
Awesome, man. And why did you want to work in that capital markets? Like, what was the rationale there?
yeah, essentially, so I worked previously in commercial banking. I had an internship previously there, and I knew that because of that role and working as a credit analyst, that I really liked working with leverage. So the different roles that I was looking at specifically was leverage finance, restructuring, debt capital markets, but my school doesn't have a heavy pipeline into those sorts of subverticals or sort of industry product groups. And so I knew that I really wanted to work in that, but I didn't know necessarily how. Wall Street Mastermind helped me out a lot with that. And I knew that at the end of the day, debt capital markets was the one with the most investment grade and the more, I guess, bigger deal flow. And so that was more interesting to me and why I really want to work in debt capital markets.
Gotcha. That's awesome, man. What did it feel like when you first got the offer?
I remember that I was stressing about whether or not I get the offer, but the day after the interview, I was in the library. I was studying for an exam, and all of a sudden I saw that I got a number from Virginia, and it said Capital One on it. So I took the call, and then I remember that for a little bit, I actually started crying from happiness. But it was kind of just like a crazy moment. I was extremely excited, and so I've been working really hard for it, and it kind of just panned out, and I was really happy.
For sure. That's awesome, man. And there's no shame in crying happy tears. The couple
Yeah.
students that I've interviewed lately, because as offers are starting to come out for summer 2026, like multiple students have said that they cried when they got the offer. So it's actually
Yeah.
more normal than you think.
Yeah.
When you work so hard for something, it's just like it's such a great feeling to see the payoff from that, right? And who are the first people that you told about the offer?
First people I told about the offer, it was you, and then my mentor Nico. And then after that, my mom and all my friends, all my close friends, and they were all like really excited and we all kind of just celebrated. So it was a crazy moment. Hello?
Oh, so sorry. I think my Zoom is shoot.
Oh, so sorry. Yeah.
Oh no, sorry. I think the issue's on my end. This is why I was trying to like close a bunch of stuff on my computer before because I was worried that it was gonna lag like this. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Let me go back to that because I had a little bit of tech issues. But um, so you were saying I was asking you who were the first people you told, and you said you told me first and Nico, who's another mentor of yours in the program. And then what did you say
Mhm.
after the rest of that?
Oh yeah, I told my whole family, like we have a family group chat and I told them, texted them, all caps, super excited. And then I told all my friends, and it was really exciting. It was a really big moment. So,
Awesome. How did your parents react? Were they like expecting it? Like, oh, we totally knew you were gonna get this, or were they like surprised?
They were like semi expecting it, but they were extremely excited for me because they saw that like it was a stressful process for me, but they knew that it was something I really wanted, so they celebrated it with me, and it was sort of just a really big moment where I saw that like the hard work paid off and actually had something tangible. And so it was really big, and we were all really happy.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. And I mean, honestly, as a parent myself too, like, as a family, your parents I'm sure have invested so much into just, your education and all of that, obviously, so like set you up for success and help you get the best career possible. And so in a way, this is kind of like the results of all of those sacrifices and investments that they have made into you as well, right? And so I'm sure it feels really, really good for them to just kind of see you get to this point. But my kids are way younger; they're like 3 and 5, so I still have a long ways to go. But sometimes I can imagine like what that day would be like, um,
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
uh,
It'll be a big moment. You can celebrate with them, so it'll be
yeah,
exciting.
looking forward to it. So let's go back to like kind of the beginning of your journey. So obviously, you joined Welsh Matchmy in November, so like about 3 months ago. Um, Prior to that, like how long, like I guess how long ago did you realize or decide that you wanted to do investment banking? And was that like right before you joined Welsh Matchmy, or did you know kind of like way in advance of that?
It was way in advance of that. So actually, when I was in high school, this might sound crazy, but I really liked sort of studying investments and studying finance. My parents put me on to Investing for Dummies and like The Intelligent Investor by Warren or Benjamin Graham. And so I sort of looked up a lot to Warren Buffett and a lot of different investors, and I saw that a lot of them got their start in investment banking. So I knew really early on that I wanted to work in investment banking, but I didn't know necessarily what product group, what industry coverage group. I didn't know what part of investment banking yet. I just knew that I really wanted to be investment banking sort of around like 15 and 16.
Gotcha.
So then, yeah, I,
Coming into college, then, like even as
mhm,
a you already knew that this is what you wanted to pursue.
yeah, I knew that I was really passionate about finance. I didn't necessarily know how to go about pursuing it. And I saw that for me, there's this one group on campus called WashU Investment Banking that was sort of like the pipeline for investment banking, sort of like the same way that IU has the workshop or other college campuses have their sort of investment banking groups. Um, and I tried really hard to get in, but I didn't end up getting in. So for me, it hit hard that I didn't know if I was going to get into investment banking after that. And I saw Wall Street Mastermind as a really good avenue to maybe um, move forward. And as a result, because I didn't necessarily know what Malcolm would be, it gave me a lot of like hope that I would have the resources, and actually ended up changing a lot for me in terms of outcomes. And not only that, but like teaching me a lot about just mindset, which made me really grow as an adult, I feel like.
Wow. Okay, that's very interesting. So like just so people understand, because I think a lot of schools have these, we call them like feeder clubs, right? Like you mentioned, like IU has like the investment making workshop. Um, like different schools have different clubs. Uh, so how is it for your school? Because you mentioned your school is kind of like a semi-target. So like that means that not all the investment banks come and recruit on your campus, but even the ones who do, are they just typically primarily recruiting the students that are in this feeder club only then? And then like if you're not in the club, then it's pretty hard to get in, or how like kind of break that down for people, I guess.
Yeah. Well, so for that theater club sort of, we just abbreviated to OAB. So a lot of people get the opportunity to coffee chat significantly more if they're in OAB, and they get specific mentors. And I sort of felt that what I was struggling with was that I didn't have a mentor and I didn't know what the path would look like in terms of going about IB recruiting. So I tried to get into YB because I really wanted a mentor, like a dedicated one that would sit down with me and give me the opportunity to chat about what I should be doing to prepare, and sort of how I should approach recruiting. So somebody that could really coach me well.
Yeah.
Um, and on top of that, they sort of have a better opportunity at one, they have like a coffee chatting database of different alums that went from OAB into investment banking. It's not necessarily the end all be all that they solely recruit out of OAB. Um, but it is that there are certain banks that have like managing directors reach out to OAB and say like, hey, like give us somebody to coffee chat with, give us some students to coffee chat with. And so it's a pretty exclusive opportunity. And even though I tried my hardest, I coffee chatted a lot of the execs, uh, it just didn't pan out. And so it
Yeah.
was pretty hard for me.
How many students apply for this each year, and how many do they actually take?
I think overall have 100 applications and they take 40.
Yeah.
It's sort of selective. So,
Uh,
but yeah, it's a tight pool.
and does everyone who gets, or I guess probably not everyone, but do most people who get into this club end up getting offers in IB, or do they talk about like kind of what their placement rate is and things like that?
They never talk about what their placement rate is. From what I understand, it's somewhere around like I'd say 60, 70%. A lot of people that join the club end up deciding that they're not necessarily interested in investment banking, or some of the people they just don't end up placing investment banking, but I'm not entirely sure. I have no idea about the numbers.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's like definitely still way above average compared to the
Mm.
overall candidate pool, um, but it's not like I mean we sometimes hear about various feeder clubs on different campuses that place like 95% or 100% of their students in IB, and it's like basically as long as you get in, you're like virtually guaranteed an offer. It doesn't sound like it's like that. So but okay, that's good to know. So like what were some it sounds like you tried pretty hard to get into this club though. So like I'm curious, what were some of the things you were doing on your own to prepare for, this club's recruiting process? Because I imagine a lot of that prep is similar to what you would do to prep for like real recruiting, right? It's like whether that's prepping for interviews or networking with the people that are already in clubs, or like what were some of the things that you were doing on your own, I guess?
Yeah. So before that, I joined AK Psi Business Fraternity. I know that you were in it. So I was in AK Psi. I did a lot of coffee chats. And even before that, I was doing coffee chats already at banks, like Bank of America. There's some other banks. I think Wells Fargo. Um, and so early on, I was already coffee chatting, and so I was trying to practice so that I could coffee chat the exec board for that club. And then I ended up coffee chatting the majority of the executive board because I thought that it would give me a better opportunity in order to. Usually, it's standard that you coffee chat the executive board at the school, so that you have a better chance at getting into the club. And then there's an interview process. So I was really preparing my behaviorals, writing them all down, hashing out my star stories, and also practicing my technicals because they have a technical interview portion where they ask questions on technicals, but they also surprise you with some technicals that are a little bit more obscure. So I practiced all of that. And even though I felt like I aced the interview, it just didn't pan out. It's selective club. So.
Yeah. So you were just like the way you were practicing for these behaviorals and technical interviews, are you just using like the 400 questions guide, or like how are you going about doing that, I guess?
Oh, for that interview, they specifically point you towards the Breaking the Wall Street accounting guide, and then they have you do that. And I think it was another one. I think it was there was another guide that they had us read in advance, and then there were some other questions that they listed out that they would ask. But even then, when I did my interview, besides the accounting guide and the other guide, I forgot which one it was, but besides those two guides and the 10 other questions that weren't in the guides, they asked some other questions about how does this work, how does that work, that they didn't list out before. And so I still ended up answering them, but they asked a lot of different questions to a lot of different people, and it's hard.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. So you don't get into this club, and then that's kind of like what made you want to join Wall Street Mastermind because you felt like you wanted to find another resource that could basically provide you with a lot of the same support and just kind of level the playing field a bit for because essentially I guess you're ultimately competing against the other WashU students who did get into these clubs and you guys are kind of going for the same jobs. Is that kind of how you thought about it?
Yeah, when I thought about it, I sort of thought about it in the sense that nobody in my family comes from finance. My dad works in marketing, my mom works in architecture, and so I didn't necessarily have any exposure outside of my own learning to finance. And so I felt that I really needed sort of guidance in the process because I know that's very rigorous. And the playing field, obviously, there are a lot more people who have the sort of mentorship and the resources and all of the different guides. And so I felt that I needed that extra support so that I could really commit to it and really figure out the best way to navigate it efficiently and have a strategic advantage. So I saw that Wall Street Mastermind was around and sort of a resource that was possible. And I did a lot more research into it, and I thought that it was worth the investment. So
Yeah. Um, did you have to like try really hard to convince your parents to let you do this program, or was that like a pretty easy conversation, or how did that all go down?
initially, they were pretty reluctant because they wanted to know that at the end of the day, there was a return on investment, that if I were to pursue this and if I were to commit to Wall Street Masterminds program, then at least something would happen. And so I looked really closely at the sort of placement rates and I looked really closely at the money back guarantee. And at the end of the day, I felt that even if I talked it over with them, obviously. And so we talked about how even if I didn't get into investment banking, one, there's a money back guarantee, but two, I would learn a lot as a young professional. And at the end of the day, it's just, I really want to grow. Um, and so I decided to commit to it, and my parents were really supportive of that after a lot of conversations, but they really understood and they thought that was a good idea since they knew I wanted to pursue investment banking, saw that I didn't get into OIB, and saw that this was a good resource, had a lot of good reviews online. So they thought it was a good option.
Gotcha. I mean, that's great that your parents are so supportive and also just like, open-minded despite maybe being initially hesitant. Like sometimes we meet a lot of parents and, if they're hesitant about something in the first, then they kind of just like are not open-minded about it and just shut it down, right? Um, oh shoot, am I frozen again? Can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear you, but you're frozen.
Okay. Um, Man, my computer's really coming. Okay, I think I'm back.
Mhm.
But yeah, I was saying like that's great that your parents are so supportive of it because and also open-minded because a lot of times I feel like we come across parents who, if they're like initially a bit hesitant about something, then it's almost like their mind is already made up and then you can't really change your mind. Whereas it sounds like you were able to just like really sit down and have a conversation with them and explain to them why you want to do this and why it's important to you and what you think you get out of it. And then ultimately, once they saw how committed you were, they were very supportive of kind of like helping you pursue your dreams, which I think is like super awesome. So I guess thank them for that on my behalf.
Mhm.
So you come into Walsh Matchpoint, right? And that was like again back in like November, and now we're in February, and you just got your offer. Walk us through kind of like what the last 3 months have been like for you. What have you been spending your time on? You know, what has been like the biggest or I guess most impactful thing, or maybe things, it could be several, that you feel like you've done? And how have you seen yourself just kind of like change and grow? You talked a little bit about kind of mindset earlier at the beginning, I think. Curious to hear you talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, what would you say have been some of the biggest changes for you from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely. I know that this might sound cliche, but genuinely, I mean this. Like when I did the secret sauce module, it genuinely changed my life because I never really sat down and thought about a lot of the different aspects, like explicitly laid out in how to approach any process that requires a lot of thinking, a lot of adversity, and just a lot of resilience. And obviously, investment banking recruiting, you really have to hang in there. And even though people are constantly getting offers, and it feels like comparison, no matter what, if you're really passionate about a process and you really love it, you have to hang in there and you have to really have the sort of qualities and traits that the secret sauce module laid out. And no matter what, you have to be willing to commit to things. I knew that obviously every year the investment banking applications open earlier and earlier. So I knew it was a really tight turnaround. I just didn't know how tight of a turnaround it would be. And so my mentor, Nico, really pointed that out to me and really emphasized, um, well, obviously you seem like somebody that works hard, but um, you have to put your head down and really grind this out for the next 3 months. And that meant a lot to me that he pointed that out and supported me throughout that entire process. Because I came late to Wall Street Mastermind. I came in like November. Um, but I really, not just through like winter break, like even before winter break, when I was still going through midterms, I dedicated myself really heavily to the modules. And studied all the technicals, wrote out all of my behaviorals, wrote the cover letter and the resume, and it felt really polished coming out of it. So um, it changed a lot for me. It made a lot of things better, but also just gave me a framework to sort of approach my life, sort of just really be efficient and mindful about time, and how I make the most out of it.
Yeah, and people are probably wondering like, what the hell is the secret sauce module? Like the people that haven't been to the program.
Yeah,
It's actually just for people to have the context, like, everyone thinks, hey, we're coming in this program, we're gonna work on resume, we're gonna work on cover letter, we're gonna work on, networking, behavioral interviews, technical interviews. And yes, you are going to work on all of those things. Absolutely. That's like 95% of your time in the program is going to be spent on doing those things, right? And so like that should not be a surprise. But we like to spend the very beginning just a little bit of time. It's Secret Sauce module is very short. In fact, it's the shortest module out of all the modules you have to go through by far. Um, just like getting each person into like the right uh, mindset and the right headspace because you're about to embark on what will be probably the most challenging journey that you've ever been on up to this point in your life. I mean, I don't say for every single person, but for most 18 to 21 year olds that are going to call it like, unless you have like an extremely difficult upbringing or something, which of course some people have, but like for most people, investment banking recruiting at this stage of your life is probably going to be the hardest thing that you've ever had to do, just because of how competitive it is. And honestly, like we could teach you everything else. And everything else we have to teach you, it's not rocket science. Like you do not have to be a genius to learn how to do any of this stuff, right? Like this is not like quantum physics or something, right? You have to have a reasonable level of intelligence, which I think most people do. And you have to have an amazing work ethic. But like what we realized, and we didn't always have the secret sauce module, by the way. Like I don't know if you knew this or not, but like we added the secret sauce module like a few years after our program started because we just started once we coached enough students, we started thinking about like, hey, what do all the most successful students in our program have in common? And then also like what do the students that are not successful um also have in common, right? And then like just based on pattern recognition, we distilled it down to the things that we ended up putting into the secret sauce module, which is like, here are all the commonalities that we tend to see from the students who get results in this program. And so it's like, if you want to be successful and you're coming into this program, the first thing we want you to know is like, try to embody these characteristics and try to exhibit these behavior. And honestly, just like you said, what it ended up becoming is not even like how to be successful in this program. It's actually just like how to be successful in almost anything you do, right? Like anything
Mm,
in life, and you will probably go on to do even harder things in the future. Because quite frankly, like that just means you're growing, right? Like I there's this like psychologist that I follow. She mainly talks about like parenting because I have two kids, and there's this concept that she talks about that I really enjoy, that I really liked, which is she says like one of the most important things to teach your kids is like resilience. And like, what does resilience mean? Resilience is like, um, when we try to go from like not knowing how to do something to which is point A to like point B, which is knowing how to do something, a lot of times like to get from point A to point B, there's like this huge squiggly, it's not like this straight path, right? It's this huge squiggly line where you're like just like you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere and you don't know if or when you're going to get to that destination that you're looking for. And that middle part is like very uncomfortable for most people because it's like that's the part where it's the part of like not knowing and not having that certainty about the outcome. Like, and even when you're going through investment banking recruiting, like until you got the offer, there's a lot of like uncertainty, right? Like, am I really gonna get this offer at some point or not, right? And a lot of people they can't handle that. And so they just kind of like give up while they're still like on this path. They're like getting closer to the goal, but they weren't resilient enough to like last all the way to the end until they actually got the results that they wanted. And so teaching our kids to realize that when you're feeling those feelings, those uncomfortable feelings, and when things feel hard, to actually like lean into that and embrace it and understand that like, oh, this just means that I'm learning. Like this is like part of that process of going from point A to point B, and it's normal. And I think a lot of people like they don't understand that, right? Or they don't think about it that way, or they haven't had to do anything that hard before, and they don't have the right expectations. And then so that's when they give up halfway through. And so like I would say like it's stuff like that. It's just like one of the many things, right? But like it's stuff like that where like we want to make sure that everyone understands this stuff before they even start working on the resume and the cover letter and the networking and the interview prep, and understanding that there's probably most likely for most people, not everyone, but for most people, there's going to be some rejection along the way. There's going to be some bankers that don't want to talk to you. There's going to be some bankers that even after you talk to them, they're not going to refer you, which is what you were hoping for. There's going to be interviews that you go to that you felt like you did well in, and then you still don't get the offer, just like kind of like when you were recruiting for the club. So all these things that we talk about to make sure that like, just people understand. And I feel like once you understand it and you know what to expect, it's still going to be hard, but then it's a lot easier for you to like get through it, right? I don't know if you found that to be true for yourself, but that was kind of like the thought process behind it.
mhm. Yeah, no, honestly, it helped me like just be persistent and just like keep going forward because it gave me a lot of motivation. Honestly, I still use what I learned from that module like today. I still think about it a lot. So yeah.
I'm super glad to hear that because usually when we talk to people about like, oh, what was like the most impactful thing for you in the program, the secret sauce module is not something that comes up because I don't think it's not like the sexy thing to talk about. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So important. And hearing feedback like this just reaffirms for me that it was the right decision for us to like add that into the program. Because like we try to be very thoughtful about like what we add into the program. We don't just try to like jam everything in and make the program longer and longer and longer. Like, like the less you guys have to do to still get the outcome that you want. Like that's what we're trying to optimize for, right? Um, so I'm super glad to hear that that was helpful for you. On the aside from the secret sauce module, so like in terms of like your resume, did you see any changes like, in terms of before versus after? In terms of like your networking and how you went about doing that, like, did you see any changes there? Like, can you talk about kind of like, I mean, those are the kind of the two things that go into determining how many interview opportunities you're going to get in the first place, right? So can you talk about that aspect a little bit?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that so because of AK Psi, I initially thought that when I wrote out my initial resume before Wall Street Mastermind, I thought that it was well written because it already had a few eyes on it. But then I remembered that I gave my resume to the revisor person and to look at. I think it was Kristen, and then I remember I got it back, and it just looked a million times better. Everything was just so much more like eloquently put. Everything was just way more detailed, a lot more impressive, and just it stuck with me that it was a lot more bulletproof compared to when I was pushing out my resume at other um pushing out my resume in the previous recruiting cycle, and I wouldn't get as many callbacks because it just wasn't as polished compared to after I put it through Wall Street Mastermind. And then on top of that, I remember the cover letter is just so well written, and there was a given format, and on top of that, even the coffee chat emails. I tweaked the format like for me a little bit so that was a little bit more personalized, but still it just gave me a really great framework, and I had a way higher conversion rate when reaching out on emails. So it was amazing. I remember that really early on when I started coffee chatting and Nico was walking me through that process. He talked to me a lot about the different resources to use and where to look for emails. And he gave me a few emails, and I was able to just crank out emails really rapidly. So I hit the ground running, and I just never looked back.
Do you remember what was the lift you got on your networking conversion rate? You said you got like better conversion rate after making some of these changes. Like, do you remember what the before and after was?
Yeah, I remember that when I was networking initially, I was only focusing on warm emails, and when I would do cold emails, my conversion rate was just basically 5%. It was really low. And then afterwards, when I did warm and cold emails, overall my conversion rate was for warm emails, it was almost 100%. It was crazy. But like granted, like sometimes I had to follow up, but still it was really high. It was like around 80%. It was crazy. And then on top of that, I think cold emails, it was somewhere around like 40%. A lot of people were reaching, like following up. And so it was way better. Uh, It was kind of crazy to see.
So are you saying originally, just so I'm clear on what you're saying originally you were only reaching out to warm contacts and the conversion rate on that was 5%? Or are you saying the 5% originally was on cold?
Oh, no. It was on cold. So my warm conversion rate, it was maybe half. It was like 50%. And then I remember that after I started using a way better email template, because before my issue was that I would have way too long emails and people just wouldn't read them. And then so it was like the people who like knew me really well would definitely reach back out. But it's like the people who like semi knew me, they didn't have time to read the email. And then they'd if they did follow up, they'd say like, "Oh, your email is really long," or if they didn't follow up, they just wouldn't follow up, and I just wouldn't get a response. But then afterwards, I knew how to frame an ask. I knew how to do so many different things, and my emails were just a lot more polished, a lot more professional. My business writing improved, and I got a way bigger response rate.
Um, and what would you say was like the breakdown between like cold versus warm? I imagine you have a lot more cold contacts than warm contacts just because people usually run out of warm contacts pretty quickly. Was that the case for you as well?
Well, I think that so the warm contacts lasted for maybe around a month, and then it started breaking down in that I was really having to stretch in order to find more warm contacts. And then so I'd resort towards cold contacts. But I remember that when I was like in AK Psi, and then I initially started trying to reach out to cold contacts, people that I just completely didn't know, but maybe I saw that we were both in AK Psi, they would barely respond. It was really
Yeah.
hard just to get my foot in the door. And then afterwards, I saw that my response rate for cold contacts just significantly improved. My emails were just a lot better. And on top of that, like I had a better resume to put into my emails. Um, I was way better at linking my times. There were a lot of etiquette things I didn't know, and it helped me stand out a lot more. So,
Dude, that lift on conversion is insane. So, because if I'm hearing you correctly, on your cold contacts, you were getting 5% conversion rate before, went up to 40. So that's like 8x. And before on
Mhm.
warm, you were getting 50, which is already pretty darn good to be honest. But that went up to 80 to 100, which is basically a 60 to, I guess 60 to 100% lift. So that's man, that's amazing, obviously, but huge congrats to you on that. I mean, for those of you who don't understand what we're saying, it's like if you're getting 8x lift on your conversion rate, that means you can literally do 1/8 the work or 1/8 the amount of networking and still get the same number of calls that you were getting before. Or if you're not a lazy ass, you would just do the same amount of work that you were doing before and get 8 times more calls, right? And it's like if you get on 8 times more calls to bankers, do you think you're gonna get more interviews? Like, yeah, of course you are. Right? So that's amazing. I might have to get you. I might have to get you to share your magical email template with us after the fact. But so so that's all like just getting interviews, right? Then let's talk a little bit about the interview prep side of things. What do you feel like was like the biggest change for you there, whether it's like the behavioral prep or the technical prep? Because obviously before, when you were trying to get into the club, for example, you were reading the guides. Sounds like you studied pretty hard for it because you tried your best basically, right? Um, People always ask us like, I already have the Breaking the Wall Street guys. I already have the Wall Street Prep guys or Wall Street Oasis guys. Or it's always like one of those three. What's the difference between what you're going to teach me versus like what I can already just like read on my own in these guides? Like, what was your experience like from that aspect, I guess?
Yeah, well, I think that one, the modules that Wall breaking up, I think that the modules that Wall Street Mastermind gave me were really helpful because they really thoroughly explained everything. And then so initially when I read the guides, I was still a little confused, especially with enterprise value and equity value, but then they explained everything so well, like leverage beta, unlevered beta. And so it made everything a lot easier to understand and way more comprehensive. I think for me, the concept of enterprise value and like when cash increases and when cash decreases, it wasn't initially, that sounds sort of like a silly mistake, but it wasn't fully intuitive until I remember I watched that video and I saw the diagrams of enterprise value and cash and debt and shareholder equity, and I saw how it would shift. And then it made so much more sense for me. But the other thing that I thought was really important was when I talked to my friends in YB, they would mention that they would have a quiz every week, and then their mentors wouldn't necessarily do anything if they failed a quiz. But I remember that for me, when I did Wall Street Mastermind, and like there would be a check-in form and there was a quiz in it, and then I did the quiz, and if I got something wrong, then you or Nico or Kristen or I think it was Andrea would follow up and say, "Hey, let's talk about like this thing that you messed up on, or if you have any questions, let's talk about it." And that really helped a lot because not all those questions were easy. Some of them were actually a little tricky. And then I got the explanation and I felt that I was held accountable. And so I appreciated that a lot.
For sure. Accountability is huge, right? I think like in this type of process, a lot of times, um, there's just so much work that you have to do. And having someone who will like check in with you regularly, make sure that everything's going well. Maybe you're stuck on something, maybe you're struggling, maybe you're like confused about something and you're not like quite sure what you're not getting. it's good to be able to just like talk through it with someone, um, and not even like in a passive way, but like if we're proactively checking in with you, because sometimes we find that like, some students are kind of shy about raising their hands, and they just like struggle in silence, which is like obviously we encourage everyone to not do that, but at the end of the day, like everyone has different personalities, but I think that's just like so important. That's like the level of support that we want to try to give you guys. And I'm really glad to hear you mention like the equity and enterprise value training too, because we try to make like the modules very comprehensive and detailed, as you said. But as you know, I created the majority of the content in the modules myself, and then but we're always looking to improve it, right? And then like at some point, Daniel, who taught the equity and enterprise value training, uh, I don't know how many people know this, but like he was actually one of like the very earliest clients in Wall Street Mastermind. He was like an OG client like in our first year basically, and then once he became a banker, he just started like giving back the program like on his own. Like we didn't really even ask him to do it. He was just like always constantly answering people's questions. Am I frozen again? Oh, I'm back. Were you able to
Oh,
hear
you're
him?
back, you're back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard it, I heard it.
So I think the audio was working. So, but my video was frozen. But like he was just so helpful to everyone in the program, like constantly answering people's questions and whatnot. So I was like, dude, do you want to just be a coach in the program? And he was like, because like he wasn't being paid. And I was like, you're spending so much time helping people and you're so good at this. Cause I could tell like he has a knack for like teaching these concepts in a way that's like easy to understand. So I was like, can I just pay you? Cause I felt bad. I was like, can I just pay you to like become an official coach? And then that's how he became a coach. And then even after that, the way that equity and enterprise value training came about was um, he noticed that a lot of students were had confusion around that concept. And then so basically that meant that whatever I already had in the module about the equity and enterprise value concept wasn't really good enough, right? Because people were still confused. And then so he volunteered to create basically that new training that you're referring to, which is like so much better than the original training I had on equity and enterprise value. But like he just made it like 10 times better and easier to understand. And that's where that was also like a proud moment for me. It's like I was the one that coached Daniel in the first place, but then that's where like, the protege surpassed, the original master or whatever. And he like Daniel honestly is like I have to say even better than I am at teaching a lot of these concepts, right? And so um, I ended up paying him a lot of money to create that training for me actually, but like it was worth every single dollar I spent because now, students like you and every other person that comes through this program have a much better understanding of that topic. And that topic is such an important topic. It comes up all the time in interviews, and a lot of people get tripped up on it. And so like um, anyway, that's like the little backstory for how that training came about. And again, I'm super glad to hear that that was a really helpful training for you. Um, but yeah, that's awesome. So basically, long story short, though, it sounds like the difference between when you were trying to learn on your own through studying the guides versus learn everything through us is just it was more comprehensive, it was more detailed, it was more thorough, and everything was explained in a way that was easier to understand versus when you were trying to self-teach, you were still like somewhat confused about a lot of the concepts where maybe you kind of feel like you understand it, but you're not like completely confident about it, essentially. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that another thing was like there's sort of a roadmap in that I needed a really quick turnaround and being able to learn everything as fast as I could, especially since like I started Wall Street Mastermind in November. And even though I had some of the technicals down, it wasn't perfect. And
Uh,
then by the time I came up winter break, I was just essentially I watched all the modules, I'd done all the guides. At that point, I wanted to interview for restructuring, and I came out knowing almost perfectly all the technicals. And so it just really helped alleviate a lot of the burden and that I had the game plan and I was just able to execute.
yeah.
As compared to before, I guess like I didn't have the game plan. I didn't know what to expect.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome, man. Cool. I guess my last question for you is, and I always like to end on this question, which is now that you're on the other side, right? You have an offer and you're done with this process, thankfully. What is the best piece of advice that you have that you will want to share with people who maybe are still going through the process or about to go through the process? It could be something that you just figured out along the way on your own, or it could be something that someone else shared with you that really helped you tremendously. Is there anything like that that you want to kind of share with our audience, I guess?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the most important thing that sort of resonated with me in Wall Street Mastermind was, I guess, two things. One was, I guess, leaving like your ego at the door, and also the second one is like being somebody who will put in the hours. And I think that because I'm not necessarily like an egotistical person, but I thought that I had good internship experience, but I didn't realize that anybody can have internship experience. It really matters that you're able to represent yourself well, because anybody can have internship experience in technicals, but by the time interviews come around, it really matters that you're able to tell really incredible behaviorals, and so that investment banking is something you care about. That's the biggest differentiator. And I felt that Wall Street Mastermind really told me how to tell meaningful behaviorals, especially because that one aspect that they added on at the end, like knowledge. I didn't know that before, that it was something that you could add on to your star stories. And once I figured that out, it really changed things up for me in that I had reflection in my stories in a lot more depth. And I felt that that helped me stand out. Um, but at the end of the day, I thought that I was complacent in that like my internships were good enough, but I didn't realize like there was a lot more work to put in. And so I really need to set my mind to the side and know that I have a chip on my shoulder and really persist on wanting to be the best. But the other thing is being able to put in the hours and like have a mindset that you have to be first in, last out. Um, it's an arduous process, obviously. It's not easy. And there were a lot of different ways that Nico helped keep me motivated, and the different modules told me how to approach this sort of process, and just not give up on myself. So that was incredibly important.
For sure. For sure. That's great advice, man. I mean, I always tell people like, look, a lot of, especially the type of students that are trying to break into investment banking in the first place, a lot of you are um, type A, go-getters, you guys are ambitious, you're pretty good students, or you have been like for most of your life, you got into pretty good schools. And so you're like a high achiever, right? And so of course, you should have some level of confidence about yourself and your ability to do things. At the same time, it's like there's levels to this, right? The analogy I would use is like if you can play Division 1 basketball, you're like pretty damn good basketball player. You're probably gonna be the best player when you show up to the park, like you're just gonna be able to, kind of outplay everybody there on the playground, but only like 1% of the people that play D1 basketball then make it to the NBA, right? So that's just like it's a totally different level. It's the same thing here versus like there's a lot of good students out there. There's a lot of people that have, decent experience on their resume. There's a lot of people that go to good schools. There's a lot of people with good GPAs. And when you're really trying to break into something like investment banking, as qualified as you think you might be, and not saying you're not, uh, there are a ton of other people out there who have like very similar qualifications, who also work really, really hard, just like you. So it's like that stuff is not, I always say like that stuff is table stakes. That stuff is not like the thing that guarantees you an offer. Like it's more like if you don't have those things, you're almost guaranteed to not have an offer. But just because you have those things doesn't mean you're gonna get an offer. It takes a lot more than that, right? And
Mhm.
I think that's really, really good advice. And a lot of times too, it's like you don't know what you don't know. Like you need someone like a third party perspective, someone who's more experienced than you are, to look at the things that you've done and point out, like if you knew what you could do to improve those things, then by definition, like those wouldn't be the things that wouldn't be the status quo. Like if you knew how to improve your resume, that wouldn't be your resume, right? If you knew how to improve your interview answers, that wouldn't be your interview answers. Like, so like unless you think you're like already at a 10 out of 10 and there's no room for improvement whatsoever, which hopefully no one ever thinks that about themselves, then like by definition, you probably need someone else to come and point out what those areas of improvements are, because otherwise, like you just can't figure everything out on your own, right? Like that's just not how it works. So, I think that's great advice. And with that, I want to just say to our audience, like for those of you who are still here, if you're still with us and you're listening to this and you feel like find yourself in a similar position, right? Maybe you discovered or decided that you want to do investment banking relatively late. Maybe you have already tried to do a bunch of stuff on your own. Maybe you've been studying the guides. Maybe you try to get into the theater club on campus. Maybe you were unsuccessful with that. But you're still determined to break into banking, and you just want to kind of put your best foot forward and get as much help as you can, if not from the clubs and from elsewhere. And if you've been struggling with networking and you want to, get a huge lift on your networking conversion rates, or if you want to just do a better job of prepping for your interviews, framing your stories, learning the technicals better, whatever it may be. Everyone has, different challenges and needs help with different things. If any of that sounds like you and you want that type of help, I would encourage you to reach out to our team. You can go to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street is abbreviated to ST. So it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And we'll get on a call with you. You can speak with our team. We'll learn more about your situation, what your profile is, what your goals are, what you feel like you need help with. And then we'll walk you through like kind of a game plan based on your situation of what we think needs to be done, how we think we might be able to help you. And then, depending on if that sounds good to you or not, if you want to move forward and work with us, great. If you don't, you can take what we give you and just go back and try to implement it on your own. That's totally fine too. But either way, I think it'll be a very, very, very valuable call for you guys, as far as like recruiting preparation goes. So just encourage you guys to book that call. But otherwise, Joseph, coming back to you, I want to thank you again for taking the time to share your story with us and just talk about your journey. And I think it's been amazing to be able to play a small part in your success. Obviously, you deserve most of the credit because you did all the work. But thank you for letting us be a part of it. And thank you for just being so great to work with and having like such a good maturity about you and your mindset in terms of just like putting in the work, having the right attitude, understanding how hard it's going to be, having a sense of urgency, and exhibiting all the traits that we typically see in our successful clients anyway. Like those are our favorite clients to work with. And so I want to thank you for that. And I'm excited to see what you do going forward and all the success that you're going to have, especially as you take some of these lessons that you learn forward with you. I'm sure it's going to help you tremendously. So yeah, man, thanks again. And congrats on a very successful recruiting process.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for having me, and also thanks so much for all your help.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. All right, guys, we're going to wrap it up here, and we will be back with more of these for you guys in the near future. And until next time, all right, cheers.